Hey there folks, JodoCast again, and this time I'm actually doing a request video for McGurk. I hope I've pronounced that right, Connor. He's just starting out on the Nerf Mods and he's got himself a Maverick and he was just wondering what can be done with a Maverick. So what I'll be doing is just stepping through the taking apart of this blaster and what mods can be done. I'm just going to use standard streamlined darts in this because that's what most people are going to be shooting out of this thing. I like to do my mods to take your normal full-size off-the-shelf darts. Some people like to do Steffens, hot glue tips, all these other types of darts, etc. But I still like them to shoot just a standard full-size dart, whether it be a streamline, an elite, even the aftermarket full-size darts. That type of thing. That's just my thing. Look, each to their own, but that's how I like to roll. Speaking of how I roll, hey, guess what? I'm going to set the cronny up. We're going to put some shots over it. All right, here we go. Ooh, that was a flyer. Okay, so there we go. We've got 12 darts over the cronny from a stock standard Nerf Maverick, and the next move is to stop the wobble. We'll go about opening it up. I'll have a look at the internals, show you the different parts and what they do, and etc., and how we go about modding it to get rid of the air restrictors and what have you. Alright, back once we've got some screws undone and ready to take the next step. Okay, so when modding for the new guys, it is always a good idea to actually keep a record of what screws go where so that you don't get them mixed up and you can make sure you do it properly. One of the easiest ways to do this is to do yourself a little map, basically a map of the gun as to the screw locations, and then as you remove the screw, if you put it onto a bit of thick cardboard like this, you can then just insert the screw and it will basically hold the place for you. So you can actually go around, remove the screws, put them into the corresponding spot on the cardboard. Then when you go to replace them at the end of the modification, you'll know exactly where each screw goes. Alright, so that's tip number one. Alright, we'll remove all the screws now, and we'll have a look inside the blaster and we'll have a look at the different mods that are doable, and I'll step you through each one step by step. So now that we have all the screws removed and we've got them into their appropriate location so we know where they go back into, there's one additional screw. Once you've undone the three on the slide here, you lift that off. It can be a little tricky because there's a post in it, so you've got to wiggle that off. And there is one additional hidden one up the top there. So you can go ahead and take that one out and pop that in your cardboard as well. And then you're right to lift this slide off altogether. Now there is a little spring inside there that hooks around that middle post there. I'll show you how to rehook that on later on. Just be careful of the little tack rail clip there that you don't lose it. Alright, now we'll open up the blaster. It shouldn't be too hard to open up. But once you've got that apart, you should be able to lift that off. There's nothing in this side of the shell, so you can actually just pop that straight aside. Alright, now very basic internals in it. You've got your trigger catch there, and your trigger catch spring. Essentially, as your trigger comes back, it hits the bottom of this little lever, which pushes up, pulls the catch down, and allows the back of the plunger section here to move forward under the power of this spring. Now the penny mod, as such, is basically where you take this spring and you compress it a bit and insert a couple of pennies behind it. So you're basically adding a bit of pressure to the spring. Now, you can only go so far because the spring needs to be able to compress enough for the plunger tube to come back and lock into place in the trigger mechanism. So you can only sort of move it about as far as forward as what it is now. So you can only put like 2 or 3 pennies in there max. Now, the difference that amount of compression is going to make, probably not a great deal, to be honest. Alright, now internally really we don't really make many mods here. Other thing we might have a look at is we'll have a look inside this tube and see if we can improve the O-ring seal. Actually, I'll do that now. Okay, so when you pull that little tube out, essentially you pull it apart. This is what you've got. You've got your outer tube, which is the part that springs forward, and this is the section of tube that actually sits up against the back of your dart housing and delivers the air to the back of the darts. Now there's an O-ring seal on here, and although it's not a bad seal, it's not perfect. So what you can do is you can actually just lift that O-ring off, just get something under it, like a pin or something underneath it to be able to lift it off. And then you can get just a thin strip of tape, or get, I actually use duct tape and cut a thin strip of it. I'll actually, you know what, I'll set this up and I'll show you exactly what I do with it. Okay, so what I do to improve the O-ring seal is I use a piece of duct tape. Now we won't need much of it because it's quite a small tube. So it's a short O-ring, so and I don't think we'll get many layers underneath there. So I just get a piece of duct tape. I actually stick it on the bench here like this, and then I just usually do it by eye, but probably not that easy for some. You may need to use a ruler or a pair of scissors or something, but essentially what I do is I just run along the edge and cut myself a nice thin strip. Of duct tape, like that. And essentially what you do is lift the O-ring off of here, give that edge a bit of a clean in there so that the tape will actually stick to it. And then just lay the tape into that gap around there. And you first layer it around and stick it back over itself. Then just work it around in that channel. I think that's going to be enough, so we'll snap it off there. On. And that should give you a better seal. Now you don't want it to the point where you can't move the thing in and out. You just want it to be, now it is actually quite tight in doing that, so I'm definitely going to put some lube in there. Yeah, it actually feels really dry. So we'll put some lubricant in there so that it frees it up so that it moves back and forward a little easier. Some silicone lube, so I'll put a little on the O-ring itself, smear that around. And I like to make sure there's some around the inside of the tube as well. I just put in a few blobs and then just actually smear it around and in. Should be good to go. We'll put that aside up top here. We'll take this spring wire as well. So we're going to put that one in place on this particular one. Now, mod number 2. Let's see about pulling out the rotating barrels. You just have to pull back the little plunger at the back pull back on this little mechanism here to release that back arm, pull it free, and you can lift the rotating barrels out. Alright, now we'll put the rest of the gun aside for now, as we're going to concentrate on these rotating barrels. Now, one of the other mods you would have seen will be the full drop barrels, where you can actually have them drop out the full extent. On a standard Maverick, your barrels drop out that far. When you disengage the cylinder in order to reload it, it only drops out sort of just wide enough to get your darts in. Whereas if you do the barrel drop mod, like this one that I've done previously, you can see that the barrels drop right out, so the whole cylinder drops right out, so you can actually get right into it and change those cylinders, change your darts. So you can see how far that comes out in comparison. Now it's quite easy to do, but it's a good mod, and it makes the gun very practical and usable. Essentially all we have to do is this little knob risen section here, what have you, we need to remove that. Now you can use a Dremel, a Stanley knife, what have you. You need to be very careful if you're using any sort of sharp implements. You don't want to cut your fingers. I'm going to try and do this with the everyday stuff that you find around the house. So I'm just going to use a sharp steak knife, serrated steak knife that I have straight out of the drawer that looks like this. A Victorinox steak knife. And that should take it off. So I'll go about chopping that off, and we'll show you once it's come off. Okay, so that's that little knob cut off there. So that's the front one. Now what you have to actually do at the rear is in this half of the shell, just make sure nothing falls out, you'll see there's that little depression there that sticks down, that little tooth that's sitting down. If I can get this camera to focus, see that little tooth there? Now essentially we've got to chop that off. So again, I'll get into that with the steak knife, and we'll take that off right now. Alright, so now I've taken that little tooth off there as well. So that essentially, that's all you have to do for your drop barrel mod. So that will now, when we put it back in, will drop out all the way. Alright, so we'll put that back. Now, your next step is to remove your air restrictors. This is the fun part. Now we have to pull this section off. Now the best way to do it is either with a big screwdriver into that gap there and lever it forward, or you can actually use a claw hammer and lever it off with a claw hammer. I'm going to need two hands for that, so I'm going to put the camera down. I'm going to take that apart. I've actually got some pliers that are sort of bent, which are ideal for this purpose. So what I'm going to try and do is, I'll see if I can film it. I'll leave that forward a bit, give me a bit of a gap so I can get the pliers in underneath. Get the pliers in there, and lever it up, and bada bing, that'll come right out. Now, at the back, be very careful. Oops, okay. You've got another little orange knob there that comes off, and there's also a little spring in there. So you need to keep track of those, don't lose those. Now, to get the rest of it apart, what we need to do is there's actually 3 screws around the outer edge here. We need to undo those 3 screws, and that'll come apart. So I'll undo those screws. Okay, so now you can actually break the seal and bring that apart, and that's the back of your dart cylinders. And here is your air restrictor assembly. Now essentially these caps will just wiggle off. You can actually just pop them off individually. And there's your air restrictor and your air restrictor spring. Oops. So these are the bits we do not need. So I'll just go around. Now, don't muck around with holes at the back here, which are your air seal. The only other thing you can do if you wish is you can remove the dart post. What I generally recommend is if you drill them out from the back, you can actually remove the post without removing too much of the material of the backing plate here. I still like to have a decent backing plate on there so that when the darts actually back up onto it, there's actually some material for the dart to sit against. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly grab my drill those out quickly, and then show you what they look like after they've been drilled out. Alright, so essentially what I'll do is take out the post and some of the material so that it opens it up, lets a bit more, significantly more airflow through, but not enough so that there's nothing there for the dart to seat onto, etc. The other thing you want to be careful of is, you see this raised section around the outside edge, you do not want to destroy that, because that actually sits into the back of this tube here and gives you a decent seal. So do not destroy the outer edge of that raised section, because if you destroy that outer edge, it will compromise your air seal and it will greatly affect your performance. Alright, so that's your air restrictors removed. You just got to make sure you get your 3 screw holes lined up on this. So if you get 2 visible, line them up, then you should be able to get this together. Pop your 3 screws back into place. Yep, it's flush. Alright, so that's ready to go back into the blaster as well. So now we can actually go about reassembling. We'll bring in the shell, put the cylinders back in, and you just have to give that little spring-loaded section at the back a little bit of a pull to get it to accept the back of the cylinders. There we go, and it locks into place. In all the excitement, my barrel tip came off, so we'll just relocate that. Okay, now this is the tricky part. This part of which is the underside of the slide, which has got your little accessory tooth, and it has this post in place. Pop that back through. The post will go through the slot on your blaster, and then your little spring that's here, you need to hook the opening at the end of the spring over that little post. That's your return spring to return your cocking mechanism after you've cocked it back. Okay, so this is your main cylinder. Now this is going to be a little bit tricky to get back into place because of the additional compression from the spring. But in saying that, it wasn't too bad. Alright, so now put that in place. Alright, we can put the half of the shell back on. Which has to get it nice and easily. Now what we'll do is we will take that inner screw, put that, which is that one there. Put in. Alright, we'll pop the slide back on so I don't have to keep holding it. And you've just got to make sure that you get that little post that sticks up in it, slots into this little hole here. So you just need to make sure you get that lined up so that it slots in, like that. And I'll grab the screws from there we go, she's all back together. Now, if I've done things correctly, this, instead of just popping out to here, she'll come all the way out. So you get a full drop barrel. Whereas it used to only sort of come out to like there. So that's mod number one. Well, that spring's definitely got more tension in it. So we've got the orange mod work spring, and we've removed the air restrictors. So that's they're the sort of normal or the usual mods you do to a Maverick. Spring replacement, increase the O-ring seal, remove the air restrictors, and done the drop barrel mod. That's pretty stock standard. We'll grab the cronny, we'll set the camera up in front of the cronny, and we'll check the readings now after having done those mods in comparison to what it was shooting before we did the mods. Alright, so that's the Maverick with the mods done to it. I'll have to check the figures and see what sort of an increase I've been able to get out of it. Alright, so there we go. So that's the Nerf Maverick as requested, and the mods that we can do to that one. Alright, so I hope that's answered a few questions for you, Connor, and just be careful with any of the cutting, if you're using a knife to take those little lugs off, etc. Just always be careful, and don't be afraid to ask an adult or a parent to give you a hand with it, just to make sure that things are safe. Alright, thanks for watching the video, and happy modding. Cheers.